Okay, well, you're very welcome here to the second stop at the farm. Again, and big thank you to the host farmer for letting us host the event on this particular farm. Again, I'm Stephen Morrison, based up at Offby, Hillsborough. You probably have seen bits and pieces in the paper over the years on calf heifer rear, and that's the area I focus in. Again, why are we focused on calf and heifer rear, and why have we put this up towards the top of the list in the agenda here today? Well, really, they're the critical animals on your dairy farm. They will be the future dairy cow. They are effectively baby cows. Again, if we look at them in particular, sort of following through in the boards in this order, they're the best genetics in your farm, or they should be. If we look at Northern Ireland PLI, which is the genetic index used mostly by farmers here, again, the first lactation animals are the ones pre-first lactation, so they haven't even joined the dairy herd, are 81 points higher in PLI than those first lactation animals, and 110 points higher than the second lactation animals. So they are the best genetics on your farm. So we want them to grow in such a way that they can deliver on that genetic potential, and we want to minimise losses. And again, try and rear them in a cost-effective manner. So it's quite a challenge, but that's what we have to try and target. Again, if we look at some of the CAFRE benchmarking figures from the business development groups, heifer rearing costs are a major investment. Now, ranging from close on £1,500 up to over £2,000, but averaging £1,700, just over that. Again, big cost in your system. Spread that over the life of the animal, look at cull cow rates, etc. And it's going to cost upwards on the top end there, 7 pence per litre. But that can come down to almost 2 pence per litre, and you'll see that in the back of your books. One of our farmers we've worked with has got his rearing cost down to 2 pence per litre on a lifetime basis. Again, looking at some of the figures from AHDB over in England, which is Dairyco, or used to be Dairyco, a delay in the age of first calving is a big contributor to that cost. And that's costing £2.87 for every day beyond 24 months of age. So massive cost for every day you slip. Again, payback wise, those animals will be midway through their second lactation before they've covered their cost. So again, we don't want to lose them, we want to make sure they can deliver. So big pressure on the system, we'll say. So how do we do it? Well, I try and simplify this down into basically a number of key points in this triangle. To get lifetime performance with the genetics you have available to you on your farm, you're really looking at health, nutrition and environment, and how they all interact with each other. And again, today, I would love to do a full talk on calf rearing. You'd be here for an hour more, or, well, more than an hour. But I'm going to focus largely on the health side of things. So what am I talking about when it comes to health? Well, we're really going to focus on this particular stop in the very first few hours of life. So again, you're really in the first days even of life. And one of the critical issues on farms is really colostrum management. And again, some will here probably roll their eyes when I mention that, because there's a lot of the information is not new information, but it's building on it and trying to put things in practice that's why the title of the talk is Back to Basics, because we're not doing it just as well as we could do. If we look at a very recent on-farm study, this is a study that was conducted on 17 commercial farms across Northern Ireland. Our average mortality rate was sitting at 6%. Those figures are pretty similar to 10, 15, 20 years ago. So we're not just where we are, but the variation's huge. Farms range from almost 0 up well over 10%. So that tells me there's a management environment issue, that can be managed, can be reduced. One of the contributing factors to that was this poor colostrum management. And again, looking at those survey animals or farms, calves that had sort of poor colostrum management were three times less likely to survive to 4 months of age. So again, it just increases your risk of an animal not being there and delivering this lifetime performance. So following that through, there's a topic called passive immune status, or passive transfer of immunity. And that's about how much of the antibodies and immunoglobulins in the colostrum that transfers into the cow's bloodstream. So a high value or high figure is beneficial. On that particular study, we found 34% of the animals, of the calves, didn't have an adequate level of immunity in their system. So again, it leaves them at high risk. It doesn't necessarily end their days as such, but it basically leaves them at higher risk of picking up infections and not delivering. Again, we'll move on to this second board. So what other implications do we have in terms of the early first days of life? Well, if we look at this on-farm study, again, the same farms, well over 3,000 calves. Calves that had scar, they're taking it a little bit beyond that, looking at scar, pneumonia, etc. Calves that had scar were twice as likely to die within the first 4 months of life. So if you had a scar, your odds of survival are starting to go against you a little bit. The calves that had pneumonia were twice as likely to calve beyond 26 months of age. So again, trying to stop even pneumonia kicking in the first place, look at strategies to minimise and replace or get rid of, really helps reduce the risks of delayed age of first calving. Again, all contributing to cost. And again, finally, the calves that had scar were 56% less likely to really start to achieve their target growth rates. So they're starting to slip behind in growth. Again, that 125 is actually slightly below target growth rate, so it's even on the low side. Following this through into the Hillsborough-based study, and then we look back through the calves that have went through the facility in Hillsborough, and Andrew here in the lead of the group is actually the calf unit manager here at Hillsborough. Again, similar story coming through. Animals that suffered ill health, had reduced weights at weaning, reduced weights at 18 months. We didn't actually check, but they're going to have reduced weights probably in around bulling age. And again, our first lactation yields as indications we've really impacted on their first lactation yield, so it's carried them through their life. This ties up quite nicely with some of the work in the US, where again they found every day an animal was ill, that over 100 kilo reduction in milk yield as a calf. So if your calf's ill, you'll see it in the tank in 2 years' time. So again, following this through, taking this through in terms of benchmarking costs, calves that suffer ill health obviously take longer to breed, they'll reach the breeding weights, increased risk that they're going to be delayed beyond 24 months age of first calving. And again, if we just factor those in, it's going to be an extra £175 or more to rear that calf to the point of calving because of the delayed age. So big costs as well as big hassle. This doesn't take into account the extra veterinary costs, the time, the labour, the hassle, the extra housing you're going to have to house these sick animals or delayed age or delayed calving animals. So again, big issues. So what are we really looking at? How do we sort of try and address it and develop systems that are less risky? Well, we're going to look purely at colostrum and really start to look at, well, what's the quality? How variable is it? How do we manage it? Well, with this particular study, we followed on these farms, we took colostrum samples from 20 calvings out of each of the farms over a whole year and followed them through with over, I think, 1,300 samples. And you'll see in the graph on this side here, towards the right-hand side over here, in that sort of shaded area, the 56% of samples were deemed good or better. Now, their samples where the IG content or the antibody type levels are pretty good. And if you feed them at a sort of recommended rate, the animals are going to be at a relatively low risk of picking up something. They're in a better position to fight off infections, etc. Unfortunately, there's about 15% of the animals in this really high risk area where the colostrum quality was almost like water. There was very little in it. And again, this is demonstrated probably in these here. This is a little bit fake, but that's what you would call a poor colostrum sample or a really good colostrum sample. And again, we'll touch on some of the techniques for measuring it in a second. Again, other issues that really crop up, and we know colostrum is absolutely packed full of nutrients and sort of health promoting properties, natural hormones, a lot of things in there that are really there to develop the calf's immune system, but also develop its digestive tract. So it's really critical stuff. Even we look at some of the simple parameters, fat levels in colostrum are 6.5, protein jumps to 14%. It'd be lovely if we were getting paid for that in our milk. Lactose goes down a little bit, but this is an area we have to just keep an eye on. This is the bacterial count. And the sort of the target levels that we're always recommended is to keep our bacterial counts below 100,000 CFUs per mil. In some of these samples, the average was sitting at 17 million. So part of that is to do with storage, where the colostrum might be stored at room temperature, sits for a while before it's used, or starts to chill, etc. And bacteria we know will grow incredibly fast at a room temperature. The other issue there is how do you collect it? Are the udders clean, the teats clean, are your hands clean, is the dump bucket clean? Every time you get a bacteria or even a small level of bacterial contamination into your colostrum, it starts to multiply, grow really quickly because it's a high nutrient value product. Those bacteria grow really quickly and becomes a bacterial soup. And you're going to feed that to the calf that's got a very weak immune system. So again, you're just asking for trouble. So it's one of the things just to keep in mind is the hygiene levels. Very critical, important factor. Somatic cell counts will always be higher in colostrum because it's just part of the immune system, the white blood cells transfer. So again, we looked through these studies, we followed the farmers, there may be a few of us in the crowd, and we looked to see what factors were linked into colostrum quality, and just purely looking at, say, the IG levels. Things that cropped up, lactation number, animals that were sort of 5th lactation beyond had about a 30% higher level of immunoglobulins than the first lactation animals, but that doesn't say don't use heifer colostrum, because there was around about 50% of those heifer samples were good, or very good. Plus, when you factored in the volume produced, you had more than adequate amounts to feed to the calf and achieve decent levels of immune status. Breed, again, we found issues in there in terms of certain breeds are slightly higher than others, but there's much variation within a breed than across a breed. Length of the dry cow period, one that cropped up there was if you had an unexpected calving or very short dry cow period, the colostrum quality really starts to suffer. Particularly if you go lower than 3-4 weeks, then you get potentially very poor quality colostrum. And they're just things to watch out for, to build into your risk management. That calf's born from a cow that only had 2 weeks calf or dry period. I've got to be more careful with this. I've got to look after it slightly differently. Colostrum collection, again, big issue here. If you delay the time from when the cow calves to collecting the colostrum quality just declines with time. Probably on average it drops about 3-4% per hour in terms of the IG level, and that's not even having the calf near it. You know, that's just the animal starting to reabsorb, starting to disappear. Dam vaccination, again, another issue, which we did find cows or dams that were vaccinated to deliver antibodies through into the milk does work. We largely found higher levels of antibody in that particular colostrum. But the thing we found were occasions where the protocols weren't followed, vaccinations weren't delivered on time, they were too close to the calving period or calving time, you weren't getting that response. Particularly if you got within sort of 3-4 weeks of calving, then you weren't really getting the response that were recommended from some of the vaccines. So follow what the vaccines say to really benefit on what they can deliver. Hygiene, again, we've largely touched on. So that's looking at the quality. We know it's variable. We have to manage the variability. If we've got time at the end, I'll just talk through some of the techniques over here, but I'll have to watch my time. So what levels are we talking about feeding? Well, really we're talking about a typical calf, so that's 40 kilos, roughly. You know, it varies, you know, from 30 to 45 probably. The IG intake, so the levels of antibody, if we want to keep it in that term, is about 120 to 180 grams. That's, looking at the literature, there's a whole range of figures out there, but that's the sort of ballpark figure you need to be at. On those farms, same with 17 farms in one study, 21 in the other, 55% of the calves were fed 3 to 4 litres. Again, that's pretty close to the recommendations, in that 3 to 4 litre mark. 73% got their colostrum in 4 hours of birth. Again, pretty good, pretty good. But again, there's always room for improvement in every system. If we modelled this variation in quality across Northern Ireland and fed every calf in around the 10% of birth weight, assuming they were 40 kilos, now having to make some assumptions here, there'd be about 86% of the calves would have an adequate immune status. Again, it's a bit crude, it's a bit simplified because sometimes you have difficult calvings, etc., that can have an impact, but that would put 15 to 20% of our calves in the high risk territory, whereas the minute we're sitting at over here with 34% rather than the 15 or 20%. So there's room to improve. Again, in Hillsborough, we conducted a number of studies with a PhD student focused on this for 3 years. Recently graduated, she may even be just coming one of the walks. And we looked at feeding this sort of higher level versus the more standard. The standard maybe traditionally would have been at 2 litres, roughly what the colostrum bags or esophageal feeders would hold, the traditional ones. So that's the 5% of birth weight, which roughly worked out at 2 litres versus 10%, which is roughly 4 litres. In that particular study, the calves, say roughly 40 kilos, were fed very quickly after birth. I think the majority of the calves were fed within the hour. So again, this is, you know, best practice to the top. In that situation, we just had a blood IG level. So the target here is to get well in excess of 10. We were just over with the 5%, and that's feeding pretty much straight after the calf's born. For the ones that were on 10% of birth weight, way in excess, up to 20. So again, we're way into the safe zone as such in terms of risk management. One of them, we followed those animals through. We looked at scar indexes, which is just an indicator of the levels of scar in that particular batch of animals. Again, much higher levels of scar in the calves that were only fed 5%. So again, we know what scar can do when we looked at these other records over here. So again, it's minimising risks. And also delivering what your vaccines, you put into your vaccines, you're actually getting it through in the colostrum. One of the issues that's been talked about in research, and Andrew, keep me right on time because I'll talk all day, is basically there was a little bit of concern if you've got lots and lots of the maternal antibodies coming from the mother, going into the calf, you may impact on the vaccine response because there's so much stuff floating around in there really effectively, and the calf maybe just can't handle it. But we looked at that, we picked a particular pathogen, looked at the vaccine responses from calves on 5 or 10% of birth weight, no impact, no issue, wasn't a problem. So we can feed 10% of birth weight without any problems. The one thing that did come out of that study was the importance of your booster vaccine for that particular pathogen. Because what happened, you got your first vaccine, you got a little lift, but not much. The second vaccine, whoof, up came your responses, which is a typical vaccine response. So again, that's looking through, we can feed higher levels and it's very safe and simple to do, and there does seem to be a move in the industry to doing it. So we are getting there. It's common practice in the US, etc., to do that. We can see the variation. So we take that to the final board here. And what are the take-home messages really from this stop? And this brings it all together. Well, firstly, I'll not ask because maybe I'll not get too many hands shown, but does everyone here have a calving and colostrum management plan in place? No. I'm going to feed so many litres, I'm going to collect it this quickly, the animal's going to be cleaned, washed down, stripped out, buckets are going to be cleaned, disinfected, etc. There's some tips in the booklet you've all got. just about how to do cleaning, how to make sure everything's spotless, to keep the hygiene levels right and avoid these high bacterial counts. And it's even things like as the colostrum being heated, reheated, cooled, etc. Getting it all planned out as best you can. There's always things crop up, but try and get it planned out. Feed 8.5 to 10% of birth weight of colostrum in the first hours of life. Again, really just put your animals in prime position to deliver. Test colostrum quality. How long have I left, Andrew? 3 minutes, so we're on a roll here. Test colostrum quality, and the way of doing this, there are a few ways of doing it at the farm side. Obviously there's lab techniques which take a wee bit of time. They're not going to have a result there and then, but again, the gold standard. On the farm side of things, we've got this typical colostrometer type equipment. So again, obviously that one's very thick, it doesn't float down into it. I've done a bit of work here. But yeah, and this one here is pretty poor. It just gives an indication of what's good, what's bad. It's like a traffic light system almost. This here is a similar principle. It's a little digital refractometer. It just tells you how much light passes through. So the really high quality stuff will have a much higher figure. And that's just a more simple version of it, sort of a more manual system. But again, all ways of testing quality. It's one just to keep an eye on, like that piece of equipment, probably 20 quid, I'm guessing, about that sort of value. And it just gives you a good indication of, well, that colostrum's high risk. Should I use it, should I not use it? Is it one that, if I'm allowed to, depending on your own policies, etc., is it one I should freeze or shouldn't freeze, etc.? So again, it's very nice and useful equipment. Ask your vet to test a few calves from time to time, just to monitor how you're doing. Are you at levels in the calves where they should be? Really just a good back check on your system. Again, one thing that's probably routinely overlooked is calf health records. Most people probably note down something. You know, calf got this, calf got that. Use them. It'll quickly show you what patterns of disease, what patterns in health are cropping in, what times of the year things are starting to happen, and really can help inform things.